Hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. This is a special edition of Channels Television's Sunday Politics, focusing on the 50 years after the Nigerian Civil War ended. We are live from our studio here in Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome, everyone. I'm Seun Okinbaloye in Lagos. This time, 50 years ago, the young new nation Nigeria, which got independence in 1960, was in the dark. Confusion was all over. So many things were going wrong. Political upheavals, disagreements everywhere. Just about anything caused rifts between the people. Election, trouble, census, chaos. Analysts at the time would have thought that the independence of the nation was an error. The nation disagreed on just about anything. It was that time when everything went south. The post-independence political structure was contested with a lot of questions about who leads, from where, and how. There was a coup in 1966 and a counter-coup 6 months after, and the war was born. 50 years after the war ended, it was adjudged as perhaps the lowest point in the history of Nigeria. What are the lessons extracted from the public memory of that conflict? Let me take you through some of the moments in that history. 50 years after the Civil War ended in Nigeria, Channels Television here giving you a robust coverage on the issues about healing, reconciliation, and reintegration. And some of the images you might be seeing, some of them will give us remembrance of what happened and how we can move forward as a people. And so, it was the 1966 coup that led to some of the conversation around the Civil War. Don't forget that some of the conversation around the census, what happened about the real figures, the election which was contested and said it was rigged before the 1966 coup, were some of the issues on the table. So Major Kaduna Nzogu was the one who led the 1966 coup. These are some of the faces of the major casualties, some of the leaders of the country, regional leaders, and of course, Tafawa Balewa, the central leader in Nigeria at the time. And some of these, the Okotiebo, Akintola, and the rest were casualties in that 1966 coup. Of course, General Agunyi-Ironsi, Major General Agunyi-Ironsi took over. He was perhaps a beneficiary of that coup, and he ruled just for about 6 months. And this happened afterward. There was a counter coup in July. It was in January that Major General Agunyi-Ironsi took over as the military head of state at the time, and 6 months after, he was assassinated. And this man, just about 30-year-old, took over as the military head of state. There was an Aburi Accord. It was a meeting in Ghana, nearby Nigeria, where top military officers met in Ghana to discuss some of the issues affecting the nation and how they can resolve some of these issues. It was popularly called the Aburi Accord, where top military officers met in Ghana to discuss the future of the country. In 1967, on the 16th of July 1967, the war broke out. It does look like the Aburi Accord was not working. There are a lot of talks about what happened to the Aburi Accord, which of the sides of the divide, whether the federal troops or the Biafran troops, who are those who did not keep to the Aburi Accord. Some of those issues we'll be talking about tonight on the program. The war broke out, and that war lasted for 2 years, 6 months. The federal troop led by the military head of state at the time, General Gowon, and of course, Colonel Odumegu Ojukwu led the Biafran troops. Afterwards, this is what has happened. Things escalated for the bad. And look at it. About 100,000 overall military casualties on both sides were recorded. So we understand from some of the figures they were able to put together at the time. Between 500,000 and 2 million Biafran civilians were said to have died of starvation. In fact, some of those pictures went around the world of how people starved. Again, death toll was said to have reached over 3 million people who lost their lives in what has become perhaps one of the worst, most devastating war situation. And so let me quickly put you through what can give you a glimpse or a graphic capture of the event of that year from 1960, our independence from the British colonial rulers. And there were political unrest, census, some of the events of 1962, which led up onto the general election of 1964. There was also a Western regional election of 1965. There were a lot of conversation around what happened between those 2 years, which of course led us into a military coup on the 15th of January 1966, led by Major Nzorogu. July 1966, there was a counter coup. Gowon takes over. And January 4th and 5th of 1967, the Aburi Accord, as I mentioned earlier, and 16th of July, 6 months after, the Civil War broke out, and it ended on 15 January 1970. The Civil War ended. On Wednesday, that will be in another 4 days or so, it will be 50 years exactly when the war ended. What are the lessons for the nation? Tonight, we shall be discussing how the nation can properly heal, reconcile those offended or aggrieved, and reintegrate those who feel left out of the equation. I have tonight someone who has some very interesting memories and a personal story of the Civil War. And perhaps he might be sharing with us how he survived or escaped by the whiskers, death, and that moment. He's going to also talk to us what we need to do as a people to get out of this conundrum and the lessons we need to learn. Professor Pat Utomi, a political economist, is my guest tonight on the program. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Great pleasure.
Please have your seat. Before we get started with talking to Professor Pat Utomi here, let's take a look at the story of the Resettlement Center for the Biafran War heroes by my colleague.
It's been 50 years since the Biafran War, also known as the Nigerian Civil War, ended. One of the bloodiest conflicts ever witnessed on the African continent. Today, we are at the disabled Biafran War veterans camp in Oji River, Enugu State. 77 disabled Civil War veterans were resettled here in 1975 during the Okpabi Asika military regime. But at the moment, only 12 are left. Some died, while others were reunited with their loved ones. Those left behind live in very unsavory condition. This tap last gave them water 40 years ago, and power supply has become a luxury. Sylvester Ibuna was 20 when the war broke out. He joined the Biafran army and fought to defend the Biafran cause. The war took its toll on him, as he now, with an amputated leg, battles hearing impairment. To keep body and soul together, possibly raise 100,000 naira, which, according to him, is needed for his hearing aid, he has taken to begging for alms by the roadside.
When I sustained this injury, it took me 4 years before I could hear again. When this shelling began, my leg was almost blown off. I tried to stand, took the first step, and then another, but I lost balance and fell.
As far as he is concerned, not much has been done to promote reconciliation and rehabilitation.
How can I forget the past in this condition? Hunger is a disease. I have no food to eat. I will always tell my children this story for the sake of posterity.
Yes. Gideon Njoku was 18 when he fought in the war, and at 71, the pain still lingers.
When our colleagues returned from Christmas, some started begging in Oka and Onitsha. They promised to pay us some compensation. They even asked us to register for it, but nothing has happened since then.
I have not received 1 naira from any organization as regards the war we went.
Apart from taking care of their personal needs, other issues of concern include a holistic approach to address the causes of the war and reconciliation that will put to rest the issues of marginalization. From Enugu, Nkiruka Ajogu, Channel Television News.
There, who visited the resettlement camp, where there is another person who is also very critical in the story of the Nigerian Civil War. It was the former military head of state, and there is an exclusive interview with General Yakubu Gowon.
Coup d'etat we had. And of course, the attempt with, what happened at that time, certainly anyone with a conscience know that it is something that is bad and something that we've got to try and put right. And various political political attempts were made to solve the problem, going even to Aburi, meeting the disagreement there, which really came about the interpretation, interpretation, of the interpretation, of what Aburi, meant. And from Ojukwu, he says, on Aburi we stand. And I say, from Aburi you will fall. So that was probably the beginning of, if in fact you said it is the Aburi agreement, that you are using, interpreting the way you want and the way you want to force it on the rest, then of course we also have a way of resolving that issue. But the Civil War, unfortunately, had to happen as a result of breakdown of that Aburi agreement. Despite effort that was made, to see if we can reconcile our differences and really save a very serious situation. But it got to the stage whereby we have Ojukwu, got his constituent assembly to give him the go-ahead to break away from Nigeria. And of course, then because of this tense situation, we have to find a way of resolving that problem. And
That's former military head of state, General Yakubu Gowon. Let's get talking with Professor Pat Utomi. Thank you so much, Professor, for coming on tonight. 50 years ago, what can you remember of those very sad situation or circumstance in the Nigerian history?
Oh, I can remember plenty. I have a vivid recollection of just about many of those moments. Actually, my moments of the Civil War started with the build-up to the Civil War. I started from Guzo in what is today's Zamfara State. I was returning to Guzo on the 29th, I think, or 30th of May, 1966. And as the train pulled into the station, I found the station was deserted. I got out of the train and was looking around, and across on the street, I saw my father's car. And then I looked properly, and there he was carrying a double-barrel gun. I thought, he can't be going to.
What was his profession? Sorry, a lot of people who understand.
My father worked for an oil company, for British Petroleum.
Yeah.
At the
so
time.
you think for an oil worker carrying a gun, that seems to be very strange.
On a Sunday morning, for that matter.
Wow.
So I thought, what's going on here? Anyway, he waves me across. I go out there, and he says, get in the car. There's been some trouble. That morning, during the course of worship, rioters had invaded the churches. My mother's hand had been broken, an arm had been broken. And because hospitals were not safe, they're driven to a friend's place. A friend of my father's at the time, interestingly, was to become information minister. Years later, Garba Wushishi was the manager of the local Barclays Bank there. So they moved my family to Garba Wushishi's home where the doctor was trying to take care of my mother. And anyway, things just deteriorated. There was a couple of days later, another wave of rioting. BP had to send a light aircraft to fly us out of Guzo. And as we were taking off, hundreds of people were literally running, chasing after this aeroplane. And so that was beginning of the email.
That was the year of the coup.
The coup.
Yeah.
In fact, the war cry of the rioters was Araba, Awari, Bamwaso, Milikin soldier. You know, let's separate. Let's break this country up. We don't want military rule. And you know. So anyway, shortly after, the civil war proper begins. Now, I was going to school now in Onitsha. I was at Christ the King's College in Onitsha when the civil war broke out.
This was in 67,
The
the year after.
The year after. Now, that's why I say I saw the civil war from several perspectives. One night, I crossed the Niger in a canoe from what was the Biafran side onto a war theater on the other side, what was the Midwest. And when I crossed, we had this horrible incident in Asaba where there had been a massacre of people who had come out to demonstrate, to wave, to welcome the federal troops that were approaching Asaba. And men were lined up this way, women this way, and cold-blooded slaughter of thousands of people, literally.
The sad memory of the Asaba, the popular Asaba massacre.
And so here I was coming to Asaba with a group of friends, family. We're trying to cross from one part of the road to the other, from the bush, the jungle, as it were, and crossing the road that led from Asaba through Ibuza, Washi, down, and we were, quote-unquote, captured. And we were lined up, men this way, women this way, and some fellow was saying to us, where are the rest of the rebels? Where are the rest of the rebels? I didn't know where the rest of the rebels were, but it was expected that the same thing that happened.
You were suspected to be one of the rebels.
Well, everybody was supposed to, you know. So, and we were going to get shot, actually. But another group of federal soldiers arrived and accosted the ones that were, you know, trying to molest us, as it were. And the two groups of soldiers started fighting. Eventually, one of the commanders, battalion commanders, moved in. And anyway, that's how my civil war on that side ended. As it turned out, fortuitously, Lieutenant Colonel Nathaniel Nassam was a friend of my father's. A few weeks later, I was in Lagos. The rest of the war, I was going to school in Ibadan. Way here in Lagos. Every time I see people in Lagos react to what's going on in the Northeast today, I just remember those days because here we were in Lagos, dancing to James Brown music. Millions of our countrymen are getting
oblivious of what was happening
totally,
in that side of the country.
Completely. I mean, we just had parties. And the war was
but there was an intense coverage by the Western media on what was happening in the eastern region of the country.
Yes, there was for some time in different ways. One of the interesting coverage failures, I want to call it that, of that era was the non-coverage of the Asaba massacre. Because not long after the Asaba massacre, there was an event in Vietnam. The Vietnam War was going on at that time. Small troop of Americans moved into this village called My Lai in Vietnam. You know, the Viet Congs used to set traps for American troops and all of that. And they were usually very nervous. And in their panic, they shot a number of civilians. It was so celebrated a case, the reporting around the world was so much that William Kelly, I remember his name very well, was tried in the United States when he returned home and was sent to jail. But in Nigeria, those who shot literally thousands of people in cold blood, even my grandfather, a World War II veteran, retired, who was in front of his house, a young soldier said to him, what are you doing there? Because the whole town had run into the bush. And he says, I'm in my house. What should I be? Where should I be? And he says, hey, young man, for target practice, shot my grandfather.
Wow.
Just like that.
Prof, we're going to take a breather. It's so much to swallow and to chew tonight. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about is on healing, reconciliation, and, of course, reintegration. Some of your experience, and, of course, in your study of political economics, what we need to be doing as a nation. We take a break. And when we return, let's go on with One Nigeria was a popular statement. We hear from the man who was Nigeria's leader, General Yakubu Gowon. Join us again. Welcome back, everyone. We have been discussing the lessons of the Biafran experience with Professor Pat Utomi. Don't forget that you can let us know what your views are on what we're discussing tonight. Tweet to us on these handles and send an email to politicstoday@channelstv.com. The handles are right there on your screen for you to see. Hashtag politicstoday. Hashtag 50 years after Biafra. Let's continue with the conversation with Professor Pat Utomi. Thank you so much, Prof. With all of the experience, you've just given us an example of your own personal experience and how in the old national equation of what happened on that day, it was an era also of conflict around the world, a lot of conflict around the world. But for Nigeria, that got independent less than 10 years and is now into a major strife. What do you think came out as a major lesson for us coming together over 250 ethnic groups?
Well, what is clear is that rational public conversation is superior any day to a motive reaction to bombs being thrown at one another. In my view, the Nigerian Civil War was completely unnecessary. It was something that honest conversation could have taken care of, and the path of progress that the country was traveling could have continued. What we have seen is that the measures that we're taking, General Gowon was talking about, and by the way, I spent a lot of time with General Gowon talking about some of these things. In fact, while he was in exile, quote unquote, during the years when it was not, I was working on my PhD thesis, and I went to spend some time with him in London in 1981, and we talked about many of these issues. And I hear his feelings, the passion which he has expressed through years. Many of the decisions we have taken as a country since then to prevent what went wrong have actually taken us back as a people. I'll give you a number of examples. We have chosen the presidential system as a way of preventing these fractured allegiances. The idea of a presidential system was to select one person who is owned by all, literally, because he has gone around the whole country canvassing the votes of people. But you and I know that has not been what has happened. What has happened, unfortunately, is that we have created a bloated, expensive political process that really does not work to advance the good we want to. The principle of subsidiarity, of authority being devolved to levels closer to the people, has been lost in this presidential system. And so what we have is a prebendal culture where assistants to the vicar come to collect prebend from the center. So Nigeria does not produce anymore.
So, I mean, the system of government that we have experimented over these years has failed us.
Very badly. Now, it has taken Nigeria away from being a productive economy. It has made us a country of rent seekers and people trying to get their share of the national cake.
From the center.
Who's going to bake this cake? And this is why poverty is the thing that defines Nigeria today. And if poverty defines the people, invariably anarchy takes over. So if you go back to the 60s, in spite of all of these problems that we saw, there was a focus on those levels of government, the regional governments, on production. Who will outproduce the other? Again, I often like to
There was
talk
a competition.
Competition. It was called by two American scholars, Robert Melson and Howard Wolpe, competitive communalism, ethnic nationality groups competing for who will most bring progress to their people.
With a sense of hindsight, Prof, you said what we are operating as a system or structure in Nigeria has failed. What would you suggest, as perhaps from the experiences that you've seen all over the world, what do you think can best fit the Nigerian structure?
I guess the thesis I can lay off here will take a lot more time than your time will allow us. But let me just cut through. When I was living in the US in grad school in the late 70s, there was an economist and political scientist at Yale called Charles Lindblom. And Lindblom wrote this book on politics and markets, in which he, one of the best realistic ways of looking at the great divisions, instead of saying dictatorship, USSR, American democracy, realistically, what defined social organization forms that countries adopted? One was a belief in intellect, knowledge, that people who have knowledge can better solve problems. That was what he called his Model 1. And this was the kind of thing that the Soviets and co pursued. Let people who can think, allocate, ensure that there is justice and everything. But we all know that those things got abused. So that didn't work. Now, the system that we generally call democracy is one that says, look, knowledge is good, but we'd rather just decide who will lead us for a period. We think this does not work, we go to another person for another period. Let it not be who is smartest necessarily, but who we want now. These two models have competed. The Chinese now teach us that you can take a Model 1, take elements of a Model 2, but the fundamental thing is focus in advancing the common good of all. Where Nigeria has gone is that we have created a system of essentially plunder. Politics about plunder in Nigeria. Who will plunder
The most.
the most? Now, in this business of plunder, the next guys are fighting these guys. You guys are plundering. No, we want to get them out. Everybody agrees with them. Yeah. And the guys who have come in have their plunder agenda. So you have greater plunderers replacing yesterday's plunderers. So it's a system that's not working. How are we going to redress this system? There are a number of fundamental values that we have to come to. The arena of public life is the arena of morality, of virtue. That's not what we have managed to create. I mean, again, go back to the masters, the thinkers, Montesquieu in America. We remember him mainly for the system of checks and balances. Montesquieu's greater contribution is that public life is about virtue. The great Nigerian scholar, Peter Eke, whose 1975 Two Publics was one of the most definitive contributions from Nigerian political science. Fortunately for us, like many things in Nigeria, Peter Eke has been living in America for more than 30 years. Now, the point he makes there is that public life is about morality. I choose to call it values.
Does that exist in our public?
That is precisely the point. The arena of public life in Nigeria is the arena of plunder.
But Prof, I mean, a lot of Nigerians have experienced this. A lot of people, especially people who have lived over 60 years and 70 years, they've been thinking, how best can we make this nation work? As scientists, being able to postulate what will work for Nigeria.
There are many things that can work for people. First of all, people have to believe it and own it. Unless they own it, it won't work for them. But fundamentally, I think that we need to return to a system of government rooted in the people. Right now, there's a disconnect between the Nigerian state and the Nigerian people.
So are you thinking about regional governments?
Certainly, I would like governments that is more devolved. I would like to go back to the old parliamentary system. I would like to make sure nobody is in public office, holding public office more than 12 years at a time. If you get into public office, one term, second term, third term, go and work. Feel the people before you come back to public office.
So, Prof, I mean, you are giving us this model from your experience and what we have seen, because we've tried this and tried that and it had failed. But Prof, you remember that we had 3 regions: the northern region, the eastern region, and the western region. There was a creation of the Midwestern region. Yeah. That was the smallest of the regions at the time, but there was still crisis. I mean, you remember that there was a Western region where the crisis, the political crisis in the Western region, led us to perhaps one of the issues that we're discussing today. So in that sense, regional government, can we go back to it? We've created so many states. We've tried the parliamentary system of government, the regional government. Has it really worked?
Groups of states can begin to collaborate. That's why when the Southwest comes up with this regional security strategy, I say, fantastic. That's the way we're going to have to be moving forward. We don't want to scrap the states. They're there. There'll be too many problems. Of their own, people will find that they need an agglomeration of states. I would like to see South-South, Southeast states come together and collaborate in a way that ultimately we find that they become a zone of development. Western states, Southwest states, as we call them today, become a zone of development. Northwest states become a zone of development. Northeast states become a zone of development. And gradually, we'll begin to have a return to some form. Because in the 60s, what created the problem was, again, the egos and the competition of the power brokers, because we did not create that public sphere for rational public conversation. It was an emotive, falling back on the tribe kind of nature of conversation. Educated, quality, public, the kind of Habermas uses to define what is modernity, what is democracy. If we had those kinds of conversations, we could have we could have resolved the issues that led to that civil war. We should not have had a civil war. And the more mature people, like Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, kept trying to prevent that war from going on. But, we had a lot of younger people who were not so mature, who had authority. And so their way held sway.
I dare tonight to talk about the devastation of the Civil War. As much as we run away from talking about what happened, would you describe the Nigerian Civil War as perhaps the worst you've seen in this part of the world?
Nigerian Civil War was terrible in terms of numbers of lives. I have dared also to suggest that the Nigerian Civil War is the second worst genocide of the 20th century. 20th century is a century of genocide. The word genocide did not exist before the 20th century. It was looking at the Armenian experience in Turkey that led to that word being literally created. If you look at the 20th century, I don't see another war save what happened to the Jews in Germany. And why do they talk about it all the time? Why do the Jews remind the world of it all the time? Why do Germans always commemorate every anniversary? 10 years of the Normandy landing. All the presidents from the West fly to Normandy in France. 50 years of this, and they keep, because they want people to realize that civilized human behavior should negate those kinds of ways of doing things. But in Nigeria, we're sweeping it under the table. Sweeping it will not work. You see, World War II literally took place because they tried to sweep World War I under the table. The kinds of agreements that were reached with Germany, the League of Nations, and all of that, literally guaranteed that some rabble-rouser will come up in Germany. And that's what happened with Hitler. And that's why we had World War II. And that is why the German people are constantly reminded about that experience so that it will not happen again.
Our possible way of reminding the Twitter and the Facebook generation of today, how do you find it?
In fact, what frightens me so much to want to talk about this war is that the Twitter and Facebook fellows are moving us very close to the state that I saw in 1966.
So we are this close again.
We're this close.
Have we learned anything?
We should learn, but we haven't really, I must say. But there is enough time to begin
To learn.
to learn.
There was agitation, and so to say, for a lot of people who have lost a sense of what really happened at the time, it wasn't only in the eastern region of the country there was agitation. In fact, the agitations in the northern region were so much. When the census happened in 1962, I think, there were agitations about the figures of the census. And what we see today also, as regarding our political life and the balances that we should have, who gets power, how people are being brought into the equation, is also a major conversation. We hear IPOP speak today. We hear a lot of people speak. From this experience and what is happening presently in Nigeria, the contemporary lesson, Prof.
It is because the politics of Nigeria is about sharing that we have these problems. If the politics is about producing, about creating, people will be too busy producing to be worrying. What do you need statistics that are wrong for? Because it will give you a bigger share of whatever. Whereas if you were producing, it is who produces the most that gets the most benefit. So that mindset needs to change. Why are we so obsessed with sharing? If we're not sharing, because everybody can produce. The beauty of God is that this country is endowed across the place, and every part of this country can become a major producer that can create wealth create the quality of life that people desire. And if people are making progress, they're not going to be quarreling about their neighbor and what language he speaks or what, it becomes a melting pot like America. You move from one state to the other. 3 years later, you pay taxes in that state. You are now from that state. But because we are still obsessed with sharing and ethnic passions determine your share in the manner of speaking, people are focused wrongly.
The agitation in the eastern region of the country presently, and the ones we saw in over 50 years ago, is there any difference? Is there any, can you align anything? Can you draw any inference into both?
Just before we came on this show, there was a youth show going on this channel, and I was listening to them. One of the things that struck me, and it was really painful and frightening, the young people on the show were saying, it's like being Nigerian holds you down. You are Nigerian, you leave Nigeria, you look everywhere, they're thriving. They talked about sports people, they talked about people in different professions who are thriving just because they left Nigeria. Until we can change that narrative, until everybody can feel that the conditions in Nigeria allow them to explore and exploit the possibilities of the outer limits of their talent, we're going to have these kinds of problems. We need a free, open society that encourages people to use their talents to the optimum.
Who should be doing this?
That is the nature of the modus vivendi that we create, the kind of social organization of our country.
So a lot of people talk about restructuring. Is that the way? Because how do we then harness and put into proper context what you have said, the kind of structure that we need, the kind of society that we require to get us to where we want to be as a people?
Unfortunately, we have a political elite that is really, if you don't mind, a parasitic elite. Everything they depend on is the parasites, the eating of society. If they were professionals, farmers, that take some time off of their work and gather together, make laws, as they used to do in the early 60s. They come to the legislative flats there, they make laws, quickly go back to their legal profession or whatever it is. It would be a different context. In this context, people live off the state. Power is desperately needed so they can extract rent.
So power is too fanciful. Yeah. We need to make it as more unattractive as we can make it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
People should go into public life for immortality, to be remembered for something, not for the size of their bank account.
We're still talking about healing, reconciliation, and reintegration. Professor Pat Utomi is still here with me on the studio, but we take a break again. And what lessons have we learned from the Biafran experience? We talk more about the issues that brings us to this point and some of the things we can take away and learn so that we don't go back to the experience you're seeing right on your screen. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. Let me quickly remind you, did you see these earlier in the week? On our Did You See That segment? It was the Amotekun experiment in the southwest region of the country. It's been one of what my guest tonight have mentioned. Is a security initiative by southwest governors and leaders who think that security situation in that part of the country needs to be taken seriously. And so they have put up a structure of security called the Amotekun outfit. Did you see that? You've been sending some of your tweets. Let me take some of them. Some people are asking Professor Utomi, my guest tonight, some question. But let me get some of your views on now. IC Ekanem at ICE Ekanem says, politics they're taking today as our reference point. One is not in doubt that Nigeria had a better structure and constitution to make a great country. All needed then was patience to build a great country. But this our young, overzealous soldiers weren't in for. James Victor is asking, great show tonight. Does the prof have a book on his own account so we can get a good detail of his account? You will answer the question, Prof. David Joel at David Joe 551-36577 says, let's restructure Nigeria. If not, we might find ourselves going back to the painful experience of the Civil War. God forbid, we don't want war. We want justice and equity. If we are all Nigerians, then all should be treated as Nigerians. Okpara Jesse at Okpara Jesse says, one of the issues with Nigeria today is state creation and each state depending mostly on the federal for some survivor. We should reconsider this regional government. We should look into what each region is known for producing and harness it for our good. Those are some of your thoughts that you sending to us. Keep them coming. Let's get back to the conversation with Professor Pat Utomi. Do you have a book for some people to learn from your experience?
Well, there are several books that have been written. I wrote an autobiography many, many years ago. In fact, before my 40th birthday, it was a very strange thing. Some publisher was putting pressure on me to write an autobiography, and a book was titled To Serve is to Live. And it's more than 20, 30, nearly, from back in the 90s. To Serve is to Live. There is another biography on me that was written by Kola Olutimei. And some of these appear in Kola's book.
Some people are already asking what became of the Aburi Accord. A lot of people said if the Aburi Accord had been considered, maybe we wouldn't have fallen into the war. January, there was an Aburi Accord. 6 months down the line, the war broke out.
Well, the Aburi Accord was a really good effort by a good neighbor. General Ankara brought, I think I still remember, photographs of General Gowon and Ojukwu sitting, and Ankara was in their middle in a car going to Aburi.
That's a very popular picture. It brings so much memories.
Yeah, and Aburi is a pleasant place, lovely place. I go sometimes to go, and there's a friend of ours who has a house on the hill just overlooking that compound where this meeting took place, and I often reflect on it it was an interesting discussion. People had their positions. Obviously, Ojukwu thought out his position a little more clearly. And General Gowon and his team, being people of peace, well, maybe overconsidered, maybe, I don't know what it was really, but they reached this accord.
But, there were also talks
Yes.
that the Ojukwu side of the divide brought with him a lot of advices.
Yes.
That General Gowon on the federal state, in fact, the Secretary of Government at the time was not present.
That's part of the issue. When General Gowon returned to Lagos, mainly the civil servants, the senior civil servants, who saved this country, by the way. We got to call them super palm sex and all of that. But the kind of work that people like Alison Aida, Flossin, Ahmed Joda, and co, Philip Asiodu and co, the kind of work they did for this country, they have not really been honored for. And that's part of the tragedy of Nigeria. Now, these men who thought more clearly on these issues recognized that there were aspects of the Aburi Accord, even though it made sense to protect the people who were angry, but if they were implemented in full, may prevent the blooming of the Nigeria of the dream of the founding fathers. The way that advice came and how trying to bridge the accord and, the art of the possible was where things went wrong. That's where elder statesmen would have been very helpful. And if you look at and examine closely the role of people like Zeke and co, that's what they really were trying to do. But the hot-blooded young soldiers accelerated things.
We're getting into the home stretch, and some of your final words on the program will be around what we need to do going forward. There were very young fellows who were at the helm of affairs at the time. General Gowon was a very young man, about 30 years old.
But a very wise young man.
Yeah. Colonel Odumegu Ojukwu at the time was a very young man, about 30 years old.
Right, young
and
man.
A lot of them were very young.
Yes.
And unlike what we have now, hardly would you find any person that's that young at the helm of affairs. But looking back at what happened, with a benefit of hindsight and a lot of issues that came up, what do you think the government of the day, remembering what happened about 50 years ago, what do you think they must do presently, at the time right now, to make sure that what we saw over 50 years ago never happened?
I think that there's a lot of writing on what could have happened and what is likely to happen in Nigeria. First of all, those who lead Nigeria should educate themselves from reading those writings. 20 years ago, I began to pressure my friends in policy to read a book written by an American called Robert Kaplan, The Coming Anarchy, which predicted that this place will descend into anarchy. Robert Kaplan had written a similar book on the Balkans, titled Balkan Ghosts, in which he predicted the way the Balkans would go if Tito died or when Tito died. And it played out like that. Now, Kaplan is not a prophet, but the point is there is an absence of rigor in dealing with problems in our country. If we were rigorous enough to begin to look at all the things that are on the ground about what the source of our problem is, we would not. Unfortunately, we are caught in a culture of capture. You know, people capture the state. And in capturing the state, you know, it's again the bounty track. Then we have the other part of it, which is regulatory capture. Private people want to capture the regulator. Everybody's trying to capture. If we run an open state committed to the common good of all, an honest public conversation, what really constitutes the good of all, we're going to make progress.
Restructuring, is that the right word?
I don't like the word because they're giving it a bad name. Principle of subsidiarity that takes authority, power to the levels closest to the people.
So do you think that the government of the day should again sit down and renegotiate how we need to move forward?
We must. It's the only way.
Could that be the legacy President Buhari could leave for this country?
One of the things that makes me pull back always and hope something big from the incumbent is that history teaches us that such a person wakes up one morning and says, I told a story very recently about von Collitz. Von Collitz was a German general who was in command in Paris as World War II was moving towards its close. And as the Allied forces landed in Europe, Hitler wanted Paris razed to the ground. And Collitz looks himself in the mirror and says, why should history remember me as the man who destroyed the greatest, the most beautiful city in the world? I think General Buhari or whoever it is in an opportune moment can say, why should history remember me as the man who prevented a country that could lead the black man out of darkness from going south?
What a beautiful way to end the conversation, Prof. Professor Pat Utomi, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Great
and
pleasure.
wish this country a greater future. Well, that's the show for tonight. But before we go, everyone, and here is my final word. There is a big lesson to be learned from the Biafran experience. The conversation on healing, reintegration, and rehabilitation are very important. But how does the 20-year-olds of these days and the Twitter and Facebook generation know what really happened and learn from them if they are not taught in school? There is a need to bring history back in our school curriculum. I dare say that even. For those finding embers of war online, know that war is not a child's play. Poverty is a major problem, which breeds crime. Government must wake up to its responsibility of ensuring that people are economically secure. A conscious effort needs also to be put into uniting this nation. It's a fragile one. Those who know must do more to keep Nigeria one. And that's my final word tonight. And that's our show. Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. I'm Shinwa Kimbale. Enjoy the rest of your evening.